Hey everyone, how you doing? Tame Type 1 here, and today let's go over a few reasons why our approach isn't as common as I think it should be. See, in a previous video, I talked about how a lot of doctors just don't know about low carb, and one of the reasons is because, well, we're just a tiny, tiny minority of diabetics. But why? Why are we such a tiny minority? For example, one of my reasons for this thesis is that you look at someone like Dr. Bernstein, who is the pioneer for the very low carb approach for managing type 1 diabetes. He is the pioneer. He's been doing it for longer than anyone else. And he's had YouTube for a very long time as well. And yet, despite that, despite there being 1.3 million type 1 diabetics in the US, his channel has about 50,000 subscribers. That's it. A lot of people, but kind of a drop in the bucket when you compare that to the number of type 1 diabetics that are out there. So why are we such a tiny minority? I'll go over a few reasons. First one I'll say has to do with the institutions, right? I'm sure you're aware of this, but you know what? Let's just go ahead and get to it anyways. The institutions aren't big fans of the Bernstein approach. They don't promote it. In fact, they often promote the exact opposite. When a doctor diagnoses a child with type 1 diabetes or even an adult, do they tell them about Dr. Bernstein? Do they tell them about, oh, they should cut out the bread, they should cut out the potatoes, they should be eating more meat and veggies, and they should be using our insulin, they should be using this, they should be doing that? No, they don't tell them that. They tell them often, well, just eat whatever you want. Take insulin for it. Here, have this pump. It'll manage it all for you, and you just do your best. Maybe they'll give you a sliding scale. Maybe they'll give you some ratios to start with. They're not going to tell you to stop eating bread, typically. They're not going to tell you to stop eating sugar, even. They might even give you like a carb minimum. They might even tell you, hey, you need to be eating this much, and you need to be doing this, doing that, but certainly not low carb. Why do they do this? Why is the institution against the Dr. Bernstein approach, the very low carb method for managing type 1? Well, let's start with the fact that the information they give is bought and paid for by companies that do not benefit from us being low carb. Think just for example about insulin. Insulin is an expensive commodity right now, especially the very fast ones that are patented, and they're made by companies like Pfizer and Eli Lilly. And they make a lot of money off of this insulin, and they're making a lot of money off of diabetics who are eating a ton of carbs and taking a ton of insulin and are not so insulin sensitive because of the carbs are making them fat, they're making them more insulin resistant, so they need more insulin, and so we're being treated sort of like pay pigs here. These companies are making hand over fist, and certainly a low carb approach would not benefit that at all. If suddenly half of the diabetics out there were like, you know what, I learned about Dr. Bernstein, I'm going to start doing low carb, and I'm going to start taking our insulin for my meals and this and that, and I'm going to need maybe a quarter, maybe an eighth as much insulin as I used to from you guys. That would not be so beneficial for them, would be. Their stock prices would plummet, their profits would plummet, their sales would plummet. That's not a good thing. So they're not going to promote that from their top level positions in their sort of role in managing the kind of education that gets out there and managing the kind of advice that gets spread from the top to the bottom. So the doctors who receive that information and give it to their patients, they're not going to promote it either. Now, is it true that there are plenty of doctors that want to help their patients? Yes, absolutely. But they're working with the information and with the guidelines that are given to them by people that might have a profit motive otherwise. And it goes actually deeper than that, because think about this as well. Imagine you're a doctor, right? You've been treating diabetics with the typical ADA approach for many, many years. And you've seen so many patients come and go, and you haven't seen a lot of success because, of course, the ADA approach does not equal success when it comes to type 1, right? That's why you're here. That's why you're watching this, because If you were so successful with the standard approach that your doctor gives you, you wouldn't need to worry about doing low carb. But of course you do, because it doesn't work, right? If one day you found out, after seeing so many diabetics fail and seeing all the anguish and suffering, the complications that go with that, if suddenly you realize that you were doing it all wrong and that there's actually this low carb method that works way better, what would you do? Would you look back and would you realize that, whoa, all the patients that I had previously under this approach that I gave them under my guidance, my responsibility, they all failed because of me. All that anguish, all that suffering, all those complications they all have, all that money, that's all because I gave them bad advice. Do you think doctors are going to realize that? Do you think they're going to reconcile with that kind of reality? Not a chance. Not most, at least. It's much easier for them to say, no. That method is phooey. It's not real. That doesn't actually work. It's not sustainable. They'll think of a million different reasons why the low-carb approach doesn't work, rather than admit that they screwed up, that blood's kind of on their hands. Because in the end, people want to be moral. They don't go in the profession seeking to destroy lives. But if they end up doing it, of course they're not going to take blame for that. Of course they're not going to recognize that. Of course they're not going to own up to something that brutal. We're only human in the end. So, the doctors don't promote it, ultimately. Long story short, institutions don't promote it. Long story short. And with that, we get to our second reason. People don't want it. They don't want it enough, at least. And we're kind of really getting to the brutal honesty here. We're kind of really getting deep with this. A lot of diabetics just don't want to do low carb. They don't want to make that lifestyle change. The doctors enable it by giving them bad advice from the start, by saying low carb is not sustainable, by, they have the lab coat and they tell them, you don't have to do that. Well, of course, a lot of diabetics are going to take that as a golden ticket to not, right? I certainly did when I was a kid. It's very unfortunate, but it's true. And so, of course, given this resistance institutionally, a lot of diabetics aren't going to be motivated to try something new like this, something that's going to, upend their entire way of being, because food centers around so much of what we do. And to say you have to cut out your bread, you have to cut out your potatoes, you have to cut out all the sweets, and you have to stick to these very specific foods, and you have to eat in this very specific way, goodness gracious. Most people can't stomach that. And they're not willing to put their long-term health over their short-term not being able to eat certain things and having to manage things a different way. So instead, they just reject it. I wish it wasn't that way. You'd think that the doctors and the patients, they would see an approach like what we do, and they'd see the results we get, and they'd think, wow, I want that. I'm going to try that. Nope. A lot of people aren't thinking like that. A lot of people are thinking about the here and now. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here. How many times have you told a diabetic, someone you might know, so you might run into, someone you befriend, and oh, you're diabetic too? Hey, me too. Hey, what's up? You tell them about the approach you do, and maybe they're interested, maybe they're not so much, but they don't end up following it. Why is that? Well, it's just too much of a complicated thing. They don't want to try it. It's too difficult. It's really not compared to the standard approach when you think about it. You're avoiding the highs, you're avoiding the lows. You're not on this constant roller coaster. Really, it's easier in some ways. But I digress. They don't want to make that change. So that's reason number 2. A lot of people, along with the institutions, they don't really want it enough, unfortunately. And reason number 3 is we sort of have this medical tyranny under place, not just in our products, not just in the fact that the products are tightly regulated, controlled. Why do you think a CGM is as expensive as it is? Because it takes tons of money to get through the FDA, right? And we sort of have that monopolized. But also, when it comes to information, we live under a medical tyranny of information, too. This was made especially apparent in 2020 when they literally start going after medical misinformation, but just all around. I really appreciate that low carb and carnivore and a lot of approaches like this have sort of become a lot more mainstream now. They've blown up. Paul Saladino, I mean, even though he's not really carnivore, he calls himself meat-based, but he eats a lot of fruit. And I still respect the guy, by the way. I still respect the guy. Someone like him is able to go and get millions of impressions on YouTube and all this stuff now, and that's awesome. But, the reason someone like him is able to, but someone like Dr. Bernstein might not be able to, well, maybe he doesn't have the star power. That's true. But also because there's sort of a medical tyranny. There's sort of a chilling effect that happens when you talk about medicine because there's this legal conundrum in the United States. And, why do you think, for example, I always say, ask your doctor, even though I clearly have a lot of resentment towards doctors? I mean, have I not made that clear just from this video alone, that I have resentment towards doctors, that they give bad advice, especially if they know better, but they give it anyways because morally they can't reconcile with it? Of course I distrust a lot of doctors. And yet I'll still say, ask your doctor. Why? Why? Because in the United States, we live under medical tyranny. We live under a system where there's a risk associated with giving information about a disease like type 1 diabetes that is largely medical in nature and largely medical in how you treat it. I take a risk talking about stuff like our insulin. I take a risk talking about how I manage my diabetes. And I have to couch that with stuff like, you have to ask your doctor first, which I do mean, by the way, of course. But I have to say stuff like this because otherwise I might get myself in trouble. One of the reasons I stopped posting so much, and maybe I'll make a video explaining fully the situation. Maybe you guys deserve that. I don't know if I want to, but perhaps it would be the right thing to do, right? But one of the reasons I stopped making videos for a while is because I felt this kind of chilling effect. I felt this sort of spookiness of, well, what if one day someone who I get on the wrong side of decides, hey, I'm going to try to ruin this guy's life. I'm going to try to ruin this guy's life and, put all this financial burden on him for simply me talking about my experience, for simply me talking about what I believe is the proper way to manage diabetes and trying to spread that to more diabetics so that way they don't kill themselves. How insane is that? How insane is that a guy like me, right, or someone else who wants to do something like this, they have to sort of reconcile with this huge risk, with this medical bureaucracy that doesn't want people telling diabetics the truth. It doesn't want people giving the truth about how, certain medicines affect them or what our insulin can do or this and that. Do I really have to get a medical degree and have to go through the same system that is killing diabetics all the time before I can just tell people how I manage my diabetes and say, hey, this works for me. Here's some information for you. Do I really have to go through all that? I shouldn't have to. And no one else should either. So that's my thoughts. I think it just comes down to the fact that, the institutions don't support it. A lot of people aren't really interested in changing their way of life in order to help themselves, unfortunately. And I mean, there's also a lot of different approaches too that aren't low carb and that sort of work. But I don't think anything works quite as well as our approach. That's why I do it. And of course, there's just a lack of proper information because there is this sort of censorship culture. There's this sort of chilling effect that happens. And I'm not blaming censorship for, my popularity, right? I just stopped making videos. I own it. But certainly there's a chilling effect. And so those are just some reasons I think why the news isn't spread as far as it could be, why there's not more type 1 diabetics doing this. I wish the whole world was doing this. When you see, look at some of my interviews, right? Look at some of the interviews I've done and like the testimonies, especially these younger guys who they get on that low carb thing early enough to where they're still making insulin and they're on the honeymoon phase. Goodness, I wish everyone could have that. But unfortunately, the institutions don't support it. The people aren't behind it partly because the institutions don't support it. And the information is just not getting out there. It's very, very unfortunate. Now, what can we do about this? Let's end this on a higher note and think about what we can do about this. Well, we can keep spreading the good word as far as we can, get people like Dr. Bernstein out, get my channel out there as well. I am making more videos now. I am really trying hard to, bring myself back because I really think this information is important and it needs to get out there. And also, when, maybe there's some good signs. Maybe we can get into these institutions as well. You have, for example, the head of the ADA. Apparently, I hear the head of the ADA, she's like a diabetic herself, maybe a type 2. She tried a low-carb approach and it helped reverse her type 2 diabetes. Wow, that's awesome. Now we need to extend that further. That's not quite enough, but certainly there's hope on the horizon for low-carb. And there's certainly young doctors that are coming up that are more open-minded to the Bernstein approach. So I think moves are being made, and I think great things are on the horizon. But right now, that's the current situation. So do your part. Be sure to tell a good friend about the low-carb approach and try to get them on it. And maybe you can inspire your doctor too as well. Talk with them about it, get your trust with them, and then say, hey, my blood sugar is so good because of this, right? And here's how you can learn more. Here's his book. Here's this. Here's that. Spread the good word. Don't be afraid to talk about your friends or family or even your doctor, right? As long as they're open-minded. I'll leave it at that for now, though. Y'all keep taming your type 1, and hopefully one day I can look back on a video like this, 10 years, 20 years time, and think, wow, what progress has been made. Look at all the diabetics out there who are now doing it right, who are saving their lives, who are living longer, and they're prospering. That's what I want in the end. I think you guys want that too. So y'all keep it easy and keep taming your type 1.